Well, hello. Welcome to the high-level panel on a new sustainable ocean economy, advancing climate and ocean action. Over the next hour, we'll be talking about how the importance of the ocean within the climate change debate. I'm delighted to be joined with some distinguished panelists from around the world. Over the next hour, we will be covering a number of issues, certainly related to the Sustainable Development Goals, climate change, and the important role that the ocean plays in society around the world. Here in London, I'm joined with Peter Thompson, UN Secretary General's Special Envoy for the Ocean and co-chair of the Friends of Ocean Action. Welcome, Peter. I'm also joined by Maria Damanaki, who's the Global Managing Director of for the Oceans at the Nature Conservancy. And in Chile, we welcome Julio Cordano, who is the head of the Department of Climate Change and Sustainable Development, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Government of Chile. Welcome, Julio, in Chile. And in Norway, we have Vidar Helgesen, who is Norway's Special Envoy for the Ocean and Sherpa for the Prime Minister of Norway and co-chair of the High-Level Panel for Sustainable Ocean Economy. I see in Paris, we're delighted that Olay Uladong, who is the permanent representative for Palau to the United Nations and Palau's ambassador on climate change, and Sherpa for the president of the Republic of Palau and co-chair of the High-Level Panel for Sustainable Ocean Economy, is joining us. Olay, if you can maybe turn your camera just another direction, then we can have you in the horizontal. There we go. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Perfect.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for spending the time with us and joining us. Over the next 60 minutes, we invite you to submit your questions via Twitter using the hashtag CBF Summit Panel. That's hashtag CBF Summit Panel. And we will direct your questions appropriately to the panelists and hopefully continue a lively conversation and discussion. Really, the opening part of this is really about how the ocean defines our planet. It regulates the climate. Every second breath that we get from the ocean, every second breath that we get comes from the ocean. So 50% of the oxygen comes from the ocean. 90% of the heat that we produce is absorbed by a healthy ocean. And indeed, 30% of the carbon we produce is absorbed by the ocean. Yet we are taking these systems for granted. Human activities are causing the seas to warm, to rise, and become more acidic. And this is certainly causing widespread harm to not only the marine and coastal ecosystems, but the millions of people around the world who depend on them. And indeed, this was highlighted in the recent IPCC report on the special report on 1.5 degrees. And we certainly expect in the forthcoming report next year, coming from the IPCC report on the ocean and cryosphere, that indeed these challenges will be highlighted as well. And so this is a very timely conversation to be had. I think it's important to remind ourselves that 39 out of the 48 CBF members are large ocean states or coastal communities. And these are extremely vulnerable environments that are facing on the face of climate change, both in terms of their food sources and livelihoods. And so this is an urgent need in how we address this. So certainly in this panel, we're going to explore this ocean climate nexus more and how can it be brought to scale to ensure that a sustainable ocean economy and how we generate income and maintain these livelihoods over time will be maintained in the face of climate change, but also highlighting the need that we need to change our practices and come down from business as usual. So if I may, could I turn to you, Peter? Over the last year, world leaders have acknowledged the importance of the oceans when they adopted the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And this was a universal blueprint to end poverty, protect the planet, ensure that there's equity across the world and peace and prosperity. And so within that, we have SDG 14, which is the ocean goal. And this is very much about life below the water as it is above the water and the people who derive their livelihoods from that. Now, what do you think are the main shifts that need to happen in terms of SDG 14 targets and the goals for the Paris Agreement in terms of how are we going to achieve these simultaneously?
Thanks very much, Christian. I'll answer that question, but first, if I may say, Yokwe Aulep, to the people of Marshall Islands and to congratulate President Marshall Islands for this very innovative idea of the virtual summit. As somebody who is pretty much constantly jet lagged, I really appreciate the concept, and I hope we'll be doing more of these virtual meetings, bringing us together around the world. Look, make no mistake, we are at a critical time for humanity on planet Earth. Whether you talk climate or ocean or biodiversity, we're at a crossroads for the future of humanity on planet Earth. We're seeing extinctions in biodiversity. We're seeing changes in the ocean, changes in the climate, which if we don't address them over the next 10 years, we really are condemning future generations of humanity to a very insecure place on planet Earth. Make no mistake about that. The science is very, very clear. So the good news is that we do have an excellent plan, a plan which was negotiated by all the countries of the United Nations after many years of arduous negotiation. Consensus was reached in 2015 for the Paris Climate Agreement and for the Sustainable Development Goals. And yes, within the Sustainable Development Goals is SDG 14, the Oceans Goal. Implemented with integrity, that plan will, by 2030, give us the security that we hope for our children and grandchildren. But if we do not have faithfulness to that plan, we really are placing them in jeopardy. So there will always be recalcitrants when you establish plans. There'll always be people getting off the bus and getting on the bus, but the great majority of us are on the bus implementing the plan, and we have to double down on our efforts for those that are less active than the rest of us. We double down on those efforts, we'll get to 230. So when it comes to the ocean and climate, there's no doubt that the two are inextricably linked. Coming from Fiji, from the Pacific Islands, you see that every day, of course, with the way that the water and the climate circulates by way of clouds and rainfall and rivers flowing down to the lagoon. So anyway, I would like to just say on SDG 14 that we're all in this together, and I think we have an excellent plan. All we've got to do is double down on it when we get to the COP in Poland in about 10 days' time. We really have to start doubling down on our efforts in climate change.
Thank you very much for that, Peter. And that's a very good segue to Ambassador Uladong and talking about in terms of the small and developing states or large ocean states, as they more aptly should be referred to. Ambassador, we are really looking at marine and coastal systems that provide resiliency to climate change. And Palau has been a world leader in protecting and restoring these ecosystems, and certainly enshrining a target of 30% of Palau's nearshore marine systems by 2030. And in doing so, you're preserving the livelihoods of local communities and traditional systems of natural resource management. So, in fact, Palau has one of the world's largest marine protected areas, an area larger than the state of California, that excludes both fishing and mining. And so from Palau's perspective, what is the role, do you think, of coastal and marine ecosystems in securing a future sustainable ocean economy in the face of climate change?
Thank you. And hi, Peter. And hello, everybody. Let me also just join in to say thank you, RMI, for really convening this first ever Climate Vulnerable Forum virtual summit, which is interesting because, one of the issues that was always a challenge for SIDS is how do you get there from traveling? And if you're talking about climate change and reducing emissions, this is one of those great forums that try and address the issues of having the SIDS voice without spending a lot of carbon footprint around the world. So I wanted to, at the outset, thank the RMI president. On your particular point and issue that you raised in regards to the nexus between oceans and climate, and I'd like to just build on what Peter said, is really what we're doing on the ground is that understanding. In Palau, we've always traditionally known the value of our ocean as the central for our livelihood. And so that's basically what we did is by having this marine protected areas network, we understand that the ocean drives the climate. It's the carbon sink. And, additional to that, by designating marine protected areas, you're not only designating basically carbon sink areas, but also habitats for fish species to then be able to have a home where they can produce and have a spillover effect that have regional benefits. And that's sort of why we started off first, as you know, Christian, about setting aside domestically our protected areas network. And then we launched the Micronesian Challenge. And then eventually we realized that it's not just about domestic, but it's also the effect that you'll have spill over to your EEZ, which is the 80% of what we did. And then now with the high seas agreement, it's possible because we've done it. And that's sort of where we're coming from, is that we know it traditionally, and now we're putting it on paper. And that's what we expect, is that, to really, and like Peter was saying, to really implement this plan, we have to scale up what works. And we think that what we've done in Palau is really something that the rest of the world should be doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And that's absolutely true. There are very good messages there in terms of scaling up what needs to happen and really recognizing the importance that the ocean plays, not only to lives and cultures, but certainly to the globe. And so just because this is something being discussed, in the Pacific, there should be these same sort of discussions going on around the world and taking it with the same sort of urgency. So perhaps, building on that in terms of, scaling up, Julio, may I turn to you in Chile? All countries have had an opportunity to revise their nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement in 2020. And this is an opportunity for countries to consider, is this a vehicle for them to advance a more integrated approach for coastal and marine ecosystem management and protection in their, in a response to climate change, in the climate change context. Chile has been one of the champions of Because the Ocean initiative. And this has been headed by you and others since COP21 in 2015. And so I guess the question to you, could you give us some insight on how Chile has been approaching this process of reviewing the NDCs? In particular, what's the possibility, do you think, of integrating ocean-related mitigation and adoption targets and actions within this process? Because I think this has a great potential and a very easy win in as far as really injecting the level of ocean context that I think has so far been missing within the climate change narrative.
Yes, thank you very much, Christian, and good morning, everybody. And let me first join also my voice to the RMI initiative of having this virtual meeting. I think it's a wonderful idea, and I hope this is creating a new a landmark of how we meet and how we communicate to each other and share our ideas. So thank you very much for this initiative. On your question, I think it's a crucial reality that we're facing, that from the point of view of practitioners, when designing climate policies, nobody's really separating artificially, the ocean from the rest of the climate policies. And this is being clearly reflected in the fact that 70% of NDCs that are being presented in the current round of NDCs already reflect around the ocean and include the ocean in many different ways, being by fisheries or ecosystem protection or coastal ecosystem management and many other things that refer to the ocean and refer to the priorities of parties. And I think this is a very compelling reality that we need to face in terms of how we can then take that energy of parties putting ocean in their NDCs and making talk to each other and see and understand what are the synergies between the efforts that they are trying to do. And this is exactly what we tried to do when we launched the Because the Ocean Declaration. As you were rightly mentioning, the first Because the Ocean was in Paris in 2015. But then there was another one in Marrakesh in 2016, when the Paris Agreement was already adopted. And the idea of this second Because the Ocean Declaration is precisely to invite parties to include the ocean in their NDCs, being in terms of mitigation or in adaptation. I think it's, and this is precisely because of many things that Peter and Ambassador Ola was already saying, that the ocean and the climate change are inextricably united, and that is something that we need to take into consideration when we develop our own climate policies. From our own perspective, from the Chilean perspective, as all of the parties, we are in our process of updating our NDC, and of course we are looking very closely on the opportunities to include the ocean. We already have the ocean in our NDCs from the point of view of adaptation. Our NAP includes a specific sectorial plan for oceans and aquaculture, fisheries and aquaculture, that we would like to expand to other issues like acidification, deoxygenation, sea level rise, and many other ocean-related phenomena. But it's not easy, and this is the last point I wanted to make in this intervention. It is not easy, not because of a lack of willingness, because everybody here, and as I was saying before, 70% of countries already have expressed spontaneously their willingness to include the ocean in their NDCs. The problem is there is a gap of knowledge, and there is a gap of tools for implementing. And the gap of knowledge is precisely what also one of the points that the Because the Ocean Declaration tries to achieve or try to point to. Many parties don't know how to do it. And this is something that we have to collectively address. And the science part is very important. It's very important that the 1.5 IPCC special report already mentions quite substantive issues related to the ocean. And even more important is going to be the IPCC special report on the ocean and the cryosphere. So from the point of view of the knowledge, we have a lot of challenges, and also from the point of view of the implementation. And here, implementation has a lot to do with the work that we are developing in the UNFCCC. Probably here, the next week in Poland, we will have very specific issues that we need to deal with that refer to the overall implementation of the Paris Agreement. But later on, we will have to go deeper in detail on how to include the ocean in our climate actions through NDCs.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that, Julio. And I do want to come back to this point of the no lack of willingness, because I think that there maybe is perhaps a disconnect there. And if there's no lack of willingness, why aren't we seeing greater visibility of the ocean within the climate change debate? So let's come back to that in a moment. I think we've sort of had an idea of the policy sort of dimension on this. Maria, can I come to you now in terms of really thinking about this in practical terms?
Yeah.
And I think really, because that's what it comes down to, we need to make this shift from this sort of abstract notion of climate change. We know it's happening, but what does it mean on the front line? And I certainly know that the Nature Conservancy has been on the forefront of exploring the terms in terms of blue carbon, carbon storage, positioning mangroves and other coastal marine ecosystems as critical nature-based solutions to climate change. And recently, the Nature Conservancy released a landmark research that shows that 30% of carbon emissions can be reduced through nature-based solutions. 30% of carbon emissions can be reduced through nature-based solutions. So, I mean, this is exciting, and I think we need to take greater notice of this. So, what else excites you about this? I mean, where do you see some of the greatest potential from some of the things that you are seeing and some of the work that the Nature Conservancy is involved with?
Thank you very much. This is an excellent question. Thank you, and thank you also, President of Marshall Islands, for taking this initiative. I have a small program. I hope it will get bigger on the ground there in Marshall Islands, and I have appreciated a lot your positive stance towards ocean conservation. So where is the potential? The potential is in ocean. And let me, before answering concretely your question, to come with a remark. I have heard everybody very carefully, and I totally agree with you. But I think we have to focus on the ocean and its relation with climate change more on the ocean. I have been in Paris when we have been discussing this agreement, and ocean was absent, though a lot of people We were trying. So I hope that in Poland and afterwards in the next meetings, we are going to focus on ocean more. As you said, my focus now, it's an idea, it's an idée fixe, as the French say. It's how we can invest more in natural climate solutions. So nature can absorb 30% of the climate change effects. And yet, we are investing in nature only 2% of the money we are spending for climate change solutions. So we have to invest more on nature, so the healthy natural ecosystem can absorb more. This is the idea. So I can refer to practical solutions, and as you said, the 3 initiatives we're taking now. First, we're going this year, hoping with a partnership with some very, very important corporate partners, to develop the first ever credit about absorption of CO2 emissions and also the resilience that natural ecosystems can produce. And this will be a big blue carbon initiative, the credit, and I hope that the governments will be afterwards persuaded to include that discussion and that credits in their plans for the Paris Agreement, because they have to submit plans. The second idea is to ensure coral reefs and other natural ecosystems. We have done that already in the Quintana Roo area of Mexico. This is the area with all the big hotels, and it is done under a partnership with the Nature Conservancy, the hotel owners, the insurance companies, the local partners. All of them have created a fund to do that. Then that we are doing the third point. We are doing these big debt swap deals. We have done that in Seychelles and planning that in 3 areas, 3 big ocean states in the Caribbean. So climate change and how the ocean absorbs CO2 has to be part of it. So I think that we have to move to action. This is my point. We have to move to concrete action. And I'm very happy because the Norwegian government came in, and I hope that Vidar is going to refer to that, with this positive message that we can have both people and ocean thrive together. It's not one against the other. We need blue economy, but in a sustainable way. So I think this can be the potential, and try to find more practical ways to keep on Paris Agreement targets, because I'm not sure we are doing very well on that, and especially about ocean.
Thank you very much, Lydia. And I think it's a really important point in terms of, we need to, it is possible for people and the ocean and the climate all to thrive, and not at the expense of one another. And we're learning that quite clearly. I do want to come back to you on some of the finance questions, because I think that's a critical element as far as how we move this forward, especially on the ground. But this is a very nice segue into coming to you in Norway, Vidar. Vidar, you were not only are you serving as Norway's special envoy for the ocean and Sherpa to the high-level panel, but you were also minister most recently of climate and the environment. So acutely aware of a number of these issues that we so far discussed. And as Maria just said, there's this question about how can we not only have an ocean and humanity that allows us to protect and prosper, but we also wanted to produce as well. And I guess my question to you, certainly in the context of the high-level panel for a sustainable blue economy, which is currently being co-chaired by the Prime Minister of Norway and the President of Palau, I mean, what do you think needs to happen to transition to a world where we can indeed protect, produce, and prosper from the ocean in the face of a changing ocean and changing climate?
Well, first of all, thank you, and thanks to the Marshall Islands for this exciting initiative. I'm convinced that we can produce, protect, and prosper at the same time from the ocean. Norway's done that for centuries. It's going to be more difficult in the face of climate change because we have changes already happening, and we have changes that we really don't know what impact will have. So there's more unpredictability. But that means there's all the more reason to explore and articulate the synergies between the ocean and climate, at least. So I think the first thing is really to articulate and make clear that there are synergies and what those synergies are. And then we need to create incentives to exploit those synergies in a sustainable way. I think Maria made a good point about the natural solutions. If you look at some concrete examples, restoring mangroves, plant kelp and seagrass beds, producing more protein from the oceans because we simply, our climate can't tolerate producing more from farmland with resulting deforestation. We need for a growing population to produce more food from the ocean. And the ocean is also presenting huge opportunities for clean energy production through offshore wind. So a lot of things can come from the ocean in terms of natural solutions, but also in terms of technical solutions that can mitigate climate. So there's not only synergies to be explored between ocean and climate. The ocean offers also synergies between mitigation and adaptation, because many of these things that you do for mitigating climate change with the ocean, like mangroves, kelp, etc., can also be very important adaptation measures. And finally, they are also opportunities for synergies and job creation and value creation on the one hand, and ecosystem regeneration on the other hand. So how do we make that happen? Well, we need more research to clarify what needs to be done and what measures can be done to optimize good results for ecosystems and the economy. We need, on the basis of that research, to articulate better the opportunities that exist, a new narrative about the relationship between humans, the ocean, and climate and the economy. And then we need really to have innovations in policy and governance, finance, tech, and the right incentives to make things happen. That's what the high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy is about. It's a panel of heads of state and government. Their added value is not to repeat what researchers tell us. They will build on research, but they should also find out how can we make those necessary things actually happen. That's the added value of politicians at best, and we hope that that's what the panel will be producing.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that, Vidar. And I think what's been overwhelmingly so supportive from all the panelists is really, the importance the ocean plays within climate change, and yet there still is this feeling that the ocean is underrepresented. 2/3 of the planet is not represented as it should be within the climate dimension and climate change space. While this is increasing, there's still more to be done. I wondered if perhaps I could come to you, Olai, in this context with respect to, have we lost Olai? We've lost Olai. Okay. Apologies. We've unfortunately lost the connection with Olai, as is the case sometimes when doing these live connections. Perhaps could I then come to you, Julio, when we're speaking about this? Obviously, Chile has been at the forefront of marine protected areas, and it is something that you have been leading on and designating number of a good percentage of your territorial waters as protected. Has Chile considered the role that protected areas can certainly play within the national infrastructure of the country in terms of that they actually not only are fish factories and create jobs, but they help mitigate climate as well? And I wondered if you could give a sense for the importance that marine protected areas have been playing within Chile's considerations of climate change.
Yes, absolutely, and that's one of the critical points I think we have, not only in our own case in Chile, that as you were rightly saying, we have been creating a number of marine protected areas, but also is something that of concern to everybody, because MPAs are clearly the most, for probably the most cost-effective tool that we have in our hands to make that link between conservation and climate change. In our own particular case, in the last few years, we've been declaring a number of MPAs around the islands, the Easter Island and other island territories of Chile, off the coast of South America, and also in the extreme south. We have declared a marine protected area in Cape Horn, and a few others. And the total amount of it is more than 40% of our sea, which is far beyond the Aichi targets, and which is something that we proudly can underline. The big challenge, though, is starting now when we start implementing those marine protected areas, and that accounts for the conservation, of course, because we need to have surveillance systems in place, which are important in the long term, are very cost effective because illegal fishing is creating a lot of problems and many economic losses. But also making the connection between climate change and conservation in marine protected areas is a challenge in itself. First of all, because we need to have clear targets for adaptation, which is not an easy thing to do in the ocean. This is where the knowledge gap comes in. But also about mitigation, because even though the ocean is the most important carbon sink in the world, we don't fully understand the dynamics of mitigation in the ocean. Because one thing is a mitigation that happens when CO2 is absorbed by the waters. That creates acidification and many other detrimental things for the health of the ocean. And something different is what happens with ecosystems. When ecosystems capture CO2, it should be identified as a natural process, as something that occurs regularly and spontaneously in nature, as forests and many other ecosystems. And still, we don't fully understand those dynamics, and this is where the international community has to come in.
Which is a really critical point, and I think it's important to see that we start to view this as a multidimensional landscape, or so seascape, in terms of these different ways in which we can restore coastal ecosystems and the role that they play within a future ocean. Oleg, welcome back. I'm sorry we lost you there briefly. Can I just come to you? We've each talked about the importance of the ocean and what it plays in our lives and in our climate. Yet it seems to be historically very much missing from the climate change discussion at the international level. And of course, you are sitting at the heart of that in New York, representing the interests of a large ocean state in Palau. It's obviously a front of mind. I think my sort of a twofold question there, if I may. One is, why do you think this has been missing, first of all? And secondly, how do you think we can actually inject this and a greater momentum and urgency within the climate change discussion so far?
Thank you, Christian, and I'm glad you asked that question and I'm glad I came in after Julio, having heard Julio, and I think the important challenge is the link. I think we have to step back and say, okay, so if we want to insert it in the UNFCCC process, then where's the link coming in? Is it the link in the Paris, the preambular, the second preambular, which says the space where you talk about food security? And so if we're going to put it in, you have to have an agreement. And as you know, Peter well knows that to inject that particular change into the UN system, you need a consensus-based agreement that we agree that and everyone understand that. So I think there's one challenge. One is to understand. Now we know we need it there, but how to have that link in? Because I think one of the fears that when you go into the climate change sphere is that often enough countries are saying, oh, for the UNFCCC, let the negotiators go to Bonn, and that's how that's how when you deal with climate is there. And then in New York, we deal with climate, but only when you talk about it in the side events or outside. But you talk about the sense of urgency when you talk about it, like for example in the Araya formula, or for the Pacific, we push it in the context of the Security Council, and then of course when you talk about ocean. Ocean in New York, you deal with at the UN, you deal with ocean in a different level, and it's like, for example, right now we're talking about the Ocean Omnibus Resolution, and I can see that in the Ocean Omnibus Resolution, you're bringing in and recognizing the IPCC. So is that a first step? Is the first step finding the link where it's appropriate to link it? So that's one. The political understanding and where to link it is very important, that we all have an understanding. Because one of the biggest fear in the UNFCCC when the issue of ocean was coming up was that, are we now going to be inviting our fisheries and ocean people into the climate negotiations? I think everyone agrees we need to deal with it. I think the issue is, yes, there's a link. How to link it? Because you don't want to overwhelm. You're bringing in other people, and so that's my point. And then secondly, in terms of my point on the need for more research, I think for us to make that link, we are looking forward for the IPCC chapter on the cryosphere and ocean, because maybe that will tell us in terms of linkage, where is that link and how we get there. So I think there's appetite to do it. It's the how.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. Just to remind our audience, we are going to be in about 10 minutes time, we're going to start picking up some questions coming through Twitter. It's hashtag CBF Summit Panel. That's hashtag CBF Summit Panel. And we'll try to pick up a number of these questions and hopefully get some brief responses from our panelists. Peter, if I may come back to you on this, just picking up what Ola had talked about in terms of the sort of discussions in the UN. You served as the President of the General Assembly 2016-2017 and really made the ocean, I recall in your opening speech, the crown jewel of your presidency of the GA. And certainly indeed that was with the having the UN Ocean Conference. I mean, we're talking about sort of two levels here. One, we're talking about the sort of the policy engagement on the issue of the ocean, but is making it real through the SDGs? I mean, I just want to bring us back to this notion of that. We have these, we have 17 SDGs. We have a number of targets on each of those. Is that where the real opportunity is to remind countries that their obligations under the SDG targets and really making those connections of the differences they can make in the livelihoods of people around the world?
Well, as I said earlier, Christian, that this is the plan that we have for our survival, the SDGs. So when we get to SDG 14, the purpose of having that UN Ocean Conference last year was to make sure that SDG 14 was being implemented, that it wasn't just a beautiful pile of words. Now, the next big challenge, of course, and by the way, it was being implemented, we found, and we set ourselves on a very vibrant track of implementation as a result of that conference. But what I really want to remind viewers about is that of the 10 targets that SDG 14 has, 4 of them mature in 2020, which is just around the corner. And, so we're not in a marathon here, we're in a sprint to achieve those targets. And when Julio was talking about what Chile is doing with 40% of its EEZ covered by MPAs, this is wonderful news, because one of those 4 targets is that we have 10% of the ocean covered in MPAs by 2020. The good news there is that we're trending well. Back in June last year, we were at about 5.7. At the moment, UNEP tells me that we're at about 7.4. So we're heading in the right direction towards that 10%. And of course, once we get there, we want to go a long way further than the 10%, and we want to improve the quality of those MPAs. So yes, a lot of people ask, are the Sustainable Development Goals really working? I would say, you have to have a plan, you have to work at it. You don't achieve things overnight. I've just come from Bangkok. I arrived last night from Bangkok, where the executive director of ESCAP told us that we are not achieving our goals in Asia Pacific, the SDGs. So, we've got to just double down on our work. It doesn't mean you give up on the plan. It just means you double down on it. And that's the message to everybody. It's the message as we go towards Katowice for the climate change meeting, which is time to double down, time to get ocean, for example, into your NDCs, time to be more ambitious in your NDCs as we head towards the next round. And of course, let me also make mention of the Secretary General's Climate Summit, which is coming up in September next year. This again is an opportunity for us to raise our ambitions on our climate action. And I'm very hopeful that we will have a second UN Ocean Conference thereafter in 2020. the responsible thing to do. If 4 of your 10 targets maturing in 2020, you've got to face up to it and see if you would achieve them or not. And the best way of doing that is to have another UN Ocean Conference. And I also want to make mention of the third part of the third leg of the stool, which is biodiversity. And of course, towards the end of 2020, we're all getting together in Beijing to look at those Aichi targets and to raise our ambition on them as well.
Indeed. Well, 2020 is certainly shaping up to be quite a year. Peter, you talked about doubling down efforts, and I think you're absolutely right. I think that certainly is the message that's coming out of our panel. But I guess the real question is, and what we hear as a common refrain is, where is the financing? Where's the money in order to be able to really double down those efforts? Because this is not going to be something that's going to come cheaply or for free in order to make that happen. And so perhaps, Medea, I could come back to you on this. I know that Nature Conservancy has been thinking about this in terms of the financing, because these activities, whether it's ecosystem restoration, building resilience, adaptation, all these things are going to require finance. And can you say briefly about perhaps thinking, what are some of the options that we potentially should be looking at that our viewers could be taking into Poland and certainly beyond in terms of this financing aspect?
You're right. Money is very important. And coming back to what Olai and Julio said about creating the link between the ocean and the climate, I can say that this costs a lot. I have the experience on working only on coastal ecosystems. What I'm trying to do is to connect coastal ecosystems with climate change. But connecting the ocean with climate change in a concrete way, with scientific data, with assessments, with whatever, costs a lot. So we need money. We have a lot of money coming now, better than in the past, coming from the public sector. A lot of governments are putting money in ocean conservation. But I think we have to move forward in 2 directions. One direction is to create good partnerships with the private industry. Private industry has to be a part of it. And I think that good partnerships at corporate level can create a win-win situation. They can have something that is meaningful for their clients, for everybody. At the same time, they can put the money in service of a good cause. So it's really something really good. So partnerships with private sector. And I think we have to overcome any reluctance about that. Yes. Everything is depending on the terms. If we have a good agreement, we are going to have good results. Yeah. This is what matters. Yeah. The second point is that we need perhaps to create better linkages between the private sector, the public sector, and donors. Leveraging up the money that we are taking from donations. This is what we are trying to do through new financial instruments like debt swaps, like insurance policy products, like creating new ideas on credits and whatever. Because governments are spending a little more, the donors not so much, to be honest. It's a very, very small portion that goes to ocean conservation. But okay, this is there. So we have to find smart ideas how we can leverage up that money. And I think that these debt swaps and similar things is an idea of a good partnership between the 3 of us, the NGOs, the governments, and the private sector. I think we have to be creative because otherwise we are going to lose. And the time, as Ambassador Thompson said, High Representative Thompson, is really critical. 2020 is around
the corner, indeed. Trying to pick up on this idea of the financing, Vida, I'd like to come to you now in the context of the high-level panel. This is something that is really at the heart of the matter in terms of a sustainable ocean economy. This is potentially a win-win because the future costs are going to far outweigh what we actually have to invest now and the savings in the future. And indeed, we're really moving to this narrative that ocean health equals wealth around the world. And so, Vida, can you give us a little bit of sense? Is this something that the high-level panel is going to really pick up on and really give some substance to the argument of building in this idea of of the ocean into your economies, and perhaps even considering something like an NDC for the ocean, something along that lines. Can you just give us a little bit of insight on that?
Yeah, well, I think it's there are a good number of countries where the ocean does play a very important role in the economy, and there are many countries where the ocean can play an even bigger role in the economy. And then you need to manage the oceans well. You can't even. I think it's great to see the progress made on marine protected areas around the world, but protecting 10 or 20% of the ocean well is not enough. We need to manage 100% of exclusive economic zones well. And that means governments need to have ecosystem-based approaches to managing the entirety of their oceans and balance, on the basis of knowledge about the ecosystems and the resources, balance the ecology and the economy, and also balance the parts of the economy against each other. To do proper, good marine spatial planning so that you produce clarity for ocean industries. And if you do that on the basis of ecosystem requirements, there is a great opportunity. And that's an opportunity also, of course, to, within such frameworks, put government money in, but also produce clarity for investors that can invest in sustainable ocean activities. And in some areas, you'll see a need for more innovative financing, where I think aid money can play a bigger role as risk mitigation for private capital, because those who are early movers in making new business models in the sustainable ocean economy, if public aid could contribute towards mitigating the risk for the early movers, I think that could be very powerful and really get a beefing up of private investments into ocean sustainability.
And that's a critical point in terms of mitigating risk, because certainly there's a lot of inherent risk associated with climate change. If I could just turn to we're into our final 15 minutes of our panel here, and I'd like now to turn to some of the questions that are coming through via Twitter. And indeed, the first one I see that comes in is from Norway, and it is about Norway's, let's see, it's a question here that says, how is Norway thinking about the impact of climate change and warming of the oceans on its fisheries and aquaculture? What can we do now to support adaptation? Vidar, obviously this question is directed at you. Do you want to just give us you've already answered it to some extent, but perhaps you could give us a little brief insight with respect to how, Norway is obviously an ocean nation, and fisheries and aquaculture is critical to your economy. Do you want to say a little bit more about that in the face of climate change?
I think what's clear is that given climate change and given the unpredictable changes happening, we need, possibly more often than in the past, to update our management plans. We need more science to tell us how our fish stocks moving because of climate change. What does that imply for management regimes? There are indications that we will actually get more codfish in the Arctic because of warming waters. Fish is moving up there. Other areas might be affected in a downward trend. It might be that locations of aquaculture will have to change as water conditions change, which of course is a need for, means there's also a need to innovate. There are now initiatives of building better fish farms that can go further ashore. So a lot is happening in that domain. But ultimately, we don't want that insecurity of climate change to accelerate. So we need to step up climate policies to mitigate. And yes, we also need to adapt technologically by use of nature and in other ways. But it's really, there are so many changes happening now that the need to step up a mission for mitigation is really key.
No, thank you. That's a very good point. I'm going to take another couple of questions now, but one I see that's come up that perhaps is not a bad way to end on. I'm going to get you all thinking about this now so you can start thinking about it, and we'll come to it right at the end. The question is, what can individuals do? This is a big question. And so in keeping with Twitter, we'll have very short sort of, I know there's 280 characters now, but let's maybe try to keep it down to the original 140. We'll just have a one sentence what you think individuals can do, and then hopefully those will be tweeted out and give some people some instructions on what they might be able to do. So get you thinking about that now. But let's come to another question we have coming in from, it looks like South Africa. And the question is, how can coastal and marine ecosystems be better reflected in countries' national determined contributions under the Paris Agreement? Julio, you've already gave us a bit of an insight, but perhaps just very succinctly, what do you think is the best way? If you were to give some instruction right now, what would you say?
Well, I guess my own perception on this is to try to tackle both adaptation and mitigation. And adaptation, many things are already happening. You just don't label it as an adaptation. So try to identify those, which might be sort of a low-hanging fruit for the NDC, and try to build from that. Talk to people. I think the relationship between central authorities and communities are very important to understand what are the actual needs. And the last thing is count your money. I think it is very important to understand how much money do you have and how much money can you access in order to implement those critical aspects. And the last thing, I guess, is talk to your researchers because they will tell you that they will need more resources. They will know where to look at, where the research needs to be done to then use that information and knowledge in order to have better policies.
Yeah, excellent. No, I think that's important. It sort of speaks to your point about this sort of gap in knowledge and tools and how to do that. So it's both case of counting your money, but also show me the money as well in terms of what actually can be achieved. Let's go to another question here. I think perhaps Ola, I'm going to come to you on this one. What is the role of local governments in supporting these agendas? Thinking about this in the broader context.
I think it's very important. I think that's a good question because I'll just say it, since this is a climate vulnerable forum. I think despite, some big countries pulling out of Paris Agreement, I think the local governments are actually doing more. So I think that question is, what role is the local governments? The local governments are actually implementing the Paris Agreement.
Yeah.
Look at the state of Hawaii going 100%. Look at Jeju. And that. So the local governments play a central role. And I think we need to provide that space to congratulate and really bring up the local governments to champion because they're the ones who are dealing with the community.
No, and you're absolutely right. And I think your nature bores a vacuum. And it's very good to see that whilst some countries feel that they need to withdraw from Paris, others are really stepping up, particularly at the local and state level.
Christian, can I just add to that in terms of responsibilities of local governments?
Yeah.
Most of the marine pollution problems that we have stem from coastal cities, and that's about rubbish collection in urban environments and so on. So the responsibilities of local government are huge in this regard as well.
Yeah. I think it's certainly a tremendous opportunity. Let's go back to Twitter. We have from let's see. I see. Okay. Perhaps Maria, we'll come back to you. This one comes from India. How can we encourage the private sector to invest in and support nature climate solutions? I mean, we talked about the potential opportunities there. But how can we encourage it? I mean, what are the incentives? Yeah, please.
Okay, let me give you an example. The only way to persuade the private sector to do something is to prove that there is some profit there for them, because they are not philanthropists. If they were philanthropists, everything will be easier, or at least a lot. So you have to prove the profit. This is exactly, to give you an example, what we have done with coral reefs. We have given to every reef a value. So I'm saying, for example, this reef here has a value of $1 million. And there we include the contribution of this coral reef to tourism, to environment, to biodiversity, to fisheries. We include the possible protection of the coastal areas behind this reef, all that. And we are giving this reef a value. Then we are going to the investors and say, do you want to build a hotel there? If this reef is healthy, then you can have a better interest rate from the insurance company. And the difference goes there to the reef.
Yeah.
We are going to the fisheries, to the aquaculture producers and say, do you want this reef to be healthy? If this happens, then your catches will increase, let's say, 30%. So we have to create the incentives for them. For example, the tourism industry is there, and they take advantage of all this nature for free.
Yeah.
For example, what we have done in Mexico is they are paying a very, very small fee, and we are investing in the coral reef to keep it healthy.
Yeah.
So they have an interest to work with us for the insurance and for the conservation. This is the only way.
So there's some amazing incentives here, and we go back to this point that ocean health equals economic wealth. There is no doubt about it. With a small investment now, the returns. I mean, if you had a natural asset, let's say of a particular reef that's worth billions of dollars, and you're constantly deriving dividends from that, surely you should be investing that if you're a prudent financial manager.
But because these people are really difficult, I can say from my experience, you cannot persuade them like that. Yeah. You need science, you need data, you need numbers. Yeah. They are persuaded by numbers.
Indeed. So I see we have 5 minutes left, and I want to come back now to the final question I'm going to pose to the panelists. So let's start where we began. Peter, what can individuals do in a Twitter character format?
I think the individual is key to the whole process. The individual affects family choices. The individual affects community choices. The individual is a consumer. When you go shopping, when you make your choices in your daily lifestyle, the individual is a voter. You vote for leaders who take the right or wrong decisions in relation to a responsible relationship and a respectful relationship with the environment in which we live. So as far as I'm concerned, everything comes down to the individual in the end.
Thank you. Ola, can I turn to you and ask you the same question? What can individuals do?
Thank you. And I think I'll just put it short. Twitter, individuals communicate. That means youth ask question. Scientists, the science policy interface and messaging. Policy, set the right policy and incentives to trigger the private sector mechanism. And collectively, for everyone to communicate and network and really getting that message across. I think that's the missing link, is communicate more effectively.
Excellent. Julio, to you in Chile.
Well, I think that it's hard to add any more thoughts about after the last interventions. But I think one idea I just wanted to mention is that we in Chile, for example, we just approved a law to ban plastic, single-use plastics in our coasts, and now we're expanding it to the full territory, which is a very important issue for also guiding how individuals can protect the ocean and contribute to a healthy ocean. I think the education part of it is very, very important. We need to not only ask individuals to step in, but also to provide them with the necessary knowledge to do it. And from that point of view, public education is very important. Raising public awareness is very important, and also to provide the general policy framework to do it.
Yeah, excellent. That's very important to have it. Maria, very briefly, we have about 2.5 minutes left, and I'm about to come to Vidar, and then I'll wrap things up.
3 words: inform, choose, support. Inform, being informed and spread the information, the good information. Second, choose sustainably. As Peter said, we are consumers, good choices. And third, support what is worthy through our stance, through our vote, whatever. So choose, inform, choose, support are the 3 words I would like to keep.
Perfect. Vidar, over to you. What can individuals do?
Individual can eat more seafood, provided it's sustainably caught, because if they eat more from the ocean and less from land, that's good for climate. And climate is pressure on the ocean. Individuals can minimize the use of plastics and waste zero plastics into nature and into the oceans. And then, since climate change is really the biggest impact on the ocean, they can also choose, to a large extent, what source of energy they use, and what modes of transportation they use. These are big questions for the world. And I also think if you start with yourself, in the next run, you're also well set to influence politicians and others.
Excellent. Well said. I'd like to thank you all very much for taking the time out of your, I know, extremely busy schedules for participating in this panel. We certainly hope that perhaps in the future we could have an entire global panel on a virtual summit on the ocean. I think we should certainly encourage our colleagues. I think this has been an excellent format, and indeed thank the President of the Marshall Islands for initiating this. I think this has been a tremendous idea, and I certainly know many people thank you, and indeed my family thanks you for not having to get on a plane and go somewhere as well. So with that, I think we're coming to an end to our session, and we know that this will be constantly played and made available on video for those who have missed it. Encourage other colleagues to indeed watch that. But otherwise, from London, from Norway, from Chile, and Paris, we thank you and we sign off. Thank you very much.
Bye.